gender/sexuality discourse surrounding the Egyptian revolution. And I thought that once my depression left me to breathe for a moment, I brought everything down and turned it into a paper, and thankfully Nadje took me on board last minute, so metaphors, therefore, are a part of ordinary explanation or lay theory. In everyday life, we use metaphors as models of how things work, for how things should be valued and how they relate to other things. A metaphor is also a great tool for exercising individual ontological autonomy, provided that one exerts oneself in the production of metaphors and not sufficing their consumption of ready-made, socially imposed ones. The process of metaphor manufacturing, therefore, becomes a site for democratic and dialectic exercises. In Refiguring Bodies, the introduction to her book, Volatile Bodies, Elizabeth Rose avers that there is a constant need for generating new metaphors that speak to people's needs, bodies, and the way they perform their bodies. Metaphors, for me, also have a healing function because they allow you to focus your energy on eternalizing the temporality of that experience and the emotions associated with it. For instance, and this is a very cheesy example, so feel free to giggle. You should giggle on cue. Because this is all I could come up with at 5 o'clock in the morning. When you say that your heart is set on fire every time you remember your distant beloved, you're channeling this pain into the beauty of representation, which, although bears within it the gravity of that pain, transcends it. So, why the sexual metaphor? Most probably because I'm obsessed with sex. I'm a sexuality researcher and activist, which explains my fascination with the discipline of sexuality and what it has to offer in terms of the knowledge of the self. In the first volume of his epic production, The History of Sexuality in Foucault exerts himself intellectually to illustrate the intimate relationship between knowledge and sexuality. He draws on the carnal nature of knowledge using the scriptural narrative, making the brilliant point that it is to submissiveness and repression, sexual and non-sexual, that the birth of knowledge is owed. He says, to speak of sex in terms of repression is doubtless the opportunity to speak out against the powers that be, to utter truths and promise bliss, to link together enlightenment, liberation, and manifold pleasures, to pronounce a discourse that combines the fervor of knowledge, the determination to change the laws, and the longing for the garden of earthly desires. Whether we are willing to admit it or not, the genesis of knowledge is situated in the realm of erotics. It is due to Eve, tiring from being eternally repressed, not to taste knowledge, and not to know pleasure, that she permitted the primary act of transgression, which made knowledge erotically erupt from the little pieces of ourselves, quoting Foucault. And so, any piece of knowledge we obtain now, this very moment, say of this bottle of water, is situated in the context of sexual realization, even if it has nothing to do with Eve and Adam discovering their private parts. Knowledge of this bottle is born out of the metaphor of Eve and Adam discovering their private part, in which case they're private no more because of that gnosis. Foucault makes transgression mandatory for knowledge to be obtained, and since all knowledge is essentially sexual, then knowing sexuality, employing it as a metaphor, and breaking the taboo by speaking of sex makes it an ultimate transgression, because we strip taboos of their power and sanctity, in so doing we question the authority of whatever people and institutions constructed taboos and infuse them with that power. This makes speaking of sex an act of resistance, hence explaining how the metaphor is apt for, how sexual metaphor is apt for exploring the Egyptian revolution, the gender/sexuality dimension of which being one of the least examined aspects so far. Since we perform our activism through our bodies, and since we engage in this ongoing revolution with our bodies, whether going to the various Tahrir squares, marching, participating in sit-ins, resisting police and military violence, becoming a human shield, covering the body of someone being beaten up to protect them, and your body ends up willingly receiving the blows, volunteering at a field hospital, being shot, wounded, losing vision in one or both eyes, dying, collecting with your body the body of your loved ones from the war, beating your chest in lamentation for your lost child, or even lying on your couch at home, taking in all that the media ejaculates in your face. It is beyond me why we still shy away from celebrating the body. As Rose eloquently states, in Egypt particularly, but also the Arab Islamic world, confines us at times to first world feminism with its victim ideologies and modi operandi. Talk about schism and how you have to always, function to the realities within yourself and your work on the ground. Thus, for example, you get a 22-year-old living in 2010 like Ali and Nadje, resorting to a bra-burning-like extreme measure, posing a naked picture of her on a blog in order to make herself noticed. We therefore have to talk a little about our not so good old-fashioned patriarchy. Patriarchy, I just want to point out a few things about patriarchy. Binary oppositions, they're very important in patriarchy. Worshipping the image is very important in patriarchy. Most patriarchal societies are heavily class societies, and patriarchy, according to people like Bell Hooks, for example, and Paolo Freire in his book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, patriarchy is heavily resting on lovelessness, and one way of resisting patriarchy is through love. So, for example, and also patriarchy pits people against each other as enemies, and people from the same sex and people from opposite sexes. For example, when Nawara Begum, the Egyptian activist, was beaten on the street in front of the field, the video on YouTube shows the men asking women to come and beat her themselves, and it's encouraging women to come and beat her themselves. And it was so telling that usually, okay, we're the ones, activists are the ones who take photos and films and stuff of the violence on the ground. But with the beating of Nawara Begum, the perpetrators themselves filmed that attack. It was like a proud honor-killing moment for them, and they filmed it themselves. There came the revolution. There emerged Tahrir Square. Revolution, Thawra, feminine noun, and the square, masculine noun, mustered all the love they could to counter the lovelessness directed at the people of this country for decades, and joined to form the body of the revolution, Jasad al-Thawra. It was an 18-day long wedding night, as the twilight goddess of spiritual feminism and feminist spirituality puts it. The prolongation of intercourse is a normal technique of sacred sex, not only because it produces enhanced energy and bliss, but also it provides a basis for the conversion of physical and mental energy and bliss into more subtle states of awareness leading to purification of consciousness. Because employing the metaphor of cosmic sacred sex to describe the first 18 days of the revolution bears special resonance in the minds of Egyptians, since one of the accusations held against revolutionaries in Tahrir Square, and in order to demonize them, they were said to have been having communal sex in the den. In an attempt to subvert that discourse, I reclaim that accusation and say that metaphorically the cosmic, masculine and feminine elements came together, every pun intended, to generate that bliss. The bliss of resistance, bringing about change, and most importantly, piecing together in an ISIS-like manner the fragments of this society, the mutilated parts of this country. The unity experienced in those then was orgiastic and Buddha-like in nature, where all boundaries were dissolved, all limits shattered, where everyone could dance, dervishes and feet on the ground once and all, because because they knew they were part of the revolution. And that knowledge resulted in the Kafodian ultimate, the forbidden state of being, where every moment of realization is an ecstasy. But because of all this, the phallic state resisted, came back strong, and is kicking and screaming, trying to survive. And I'm just going to point really quickly to some of the, just few things, just bullet points. You have the young people are still accused of being ill-behaving when they ask staff to leave us alone and sort off. And they said that they cannot respect their elders. Virginity tests, and caught up again in the dichotomy of the Virgin War, especially that the women who were taken to be tested, it was that the narrative that Samira Rahim gives is that they wanted to test her so they could protect her from the accusation and the crime of prostitution. And I just want to show you first before the Samira and other women were rounded up. And it was torn up by men. I was harassed, sexually harassed by men. And a lot of us were, and this is what happened to this very benign Sorry? Okay, yeah, it was before the referendum, the constitutional referendum, and we were asking for a constitution that would equally represent all people and would end all forms of discrimination against women and others.